You see, something's going to happen.
What? What's going to happen?
Something wonderful.
What?
I understand how you feel. You see, it's all very clear to me now.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. Today's episode, we got a very, very, very special guest.
Not three berries, come on.
No, I think very special to me. It's somebody, you know, when I get a show that I can have on that I actually look to for information and inspires me. To me, it's a huge thing. So to me, I got a very, very, very special guest. But before we get to the guest himself, Joey P. from the Library of the Untold, we will introduce the other rejects that are joining us today as well. Today we got Lisa, the Occult Reject Mad Scientist. Thank you very much for joining us. Ethan Indigo, my man, the fourth initiate. Thank you very much for joining us. Headless Giant is here. We got Magic Mike. And we do got the OG himself, Robby Marx. We got everybody, we got all of them joining us. And today we're getting to Coral Castle with Library of the Untold. Joey, if you can, please let everybody know what your deal is in case they don't even know who you are yet. Please let them know where they can find all your amazing work, please.
Well, I host Library of the Untold, and I guess I pretty much everything else Library of the Untold as well. And Coral Castle has always been fascinating to me because of moving large rocks, which has always been fascinating to me. And I thought that was what was special about Coral Castle, the fact that he moved these megalithic stones. And that is amazing, but it wasn't quite enough for me to do an hour-long special.
Yeah.
So I accidentally threw Praveen Mahan, you'll have to excuse me for forgetting his name, but he's got a YouTube channel based on ancient India. And he, for whatever reason, covered Coral Castle and wrote a book called Coral Castle, Everything You Know Is Wrong. And a good half of what I put in my episode is strictly due to his legwork. But putting the episode together, I was absolutely flabbergasted to find out that the large stones weren't even half the story. The fact this man had an understanding of the solar system that we didn't have for another 70 years. Come on.
Yeah, that is some weird stuff too. As we get into it, some of the stuff he did matched stuff with the moon and the stars that they didn't even know yet.
Right. And I think that the whole love story that they concocted after his death was a cover story. To be frank, we can't prove that part, but it seems like a cover story to me.
One piece of evidence that I would use to support that claim is the fact that they had to put a Masonic temple out in front of Coral Castle, and everybody knew back then Leeds Callan didn't have any associations with the Masons, but they had to go and put that right out in front of his whole put their brand name on Coral Castle. They thought it was Freemasonry.
Wow.
So they were claiming.
See, I didn't even know that part. This story grows by the moment, dude.
Grows by the moment. I love it.
I'm loving the kitty, by the way, Headless Giant. Hell yeah. But yeah, no, I don't. Where did Edward even come from? That's what drives me crazy about this. This guy knew that the moon had water. He knew how to calculate the sidereal year. He understood electromagnetic energy. And he's like is supposedly from this place where they traced back to find out. I forgot the exact country, but they can't find record of him because he spelled his name different everywhere he went. And I guess I don't blame the Freemasons for one mistake. What was it?
Latva.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, they couldn't find really anything on that, much less the whole Sweet 16 that they attributed to his eccentricism, which, by the way, I don't think he was eccentric. I just think that he was a man of few words and of great passion,
Well, he's probably thinking about designing that thing all the time in his head.
Yeah, that's all he did.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing for him too, because he was able to prove. If he's got the world's only megalithic site and well, not to mention world's only megalithic calendar, sundial, world's only a lot of things that start with the word megalithic, but just the overall fact, world's only modern megalithic site. So he was able to prove to us that this is possible by human beings, so that we can kind of calm down on the whole aliens built the pyramids thing just a little bit, you know? Now, I mean, his work wasn't as extensive as the pyramids, of course, but he was one dude. He weighed 120 pounds, you know?
Well, you know what's interesting? You know, one of the reasons why I even want to have you on for this topic is because, you know, me and Headless Giant had somebody on who was talking about the pyramids and almost very much showing the same thing that I think what you're kind of saying with Coral Castle about possibly the person harnessing energy and electricity. You know, using the running water and everything underneath, you know, because it was running water under the pyramids too. But very, very interesting. I guess like one thing that maybe we could try to get into, just to maybe make sure we touch on a lot of things, or at least bring them up. What was some of the, just maybe to touch on some of the things that are obvious with Coral Castle that it was used for, the symbolism that was in there? You know.
Well, like right when you walk up to it, this is one of my favorite parts, is the planet corner. You can see the planet corner from pretty far away, but it raises a lot of questions because all of the planets are various sizes that you wouldn't expect. For example, Mars is depicted much bigger than Saturn, and you know, the moon is depicted biggest at all. But it's kind of an obvious thing because that's what the planets look like to us. And the way he lined up the planets were not Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, blah, blah, blah. He did it as they tend to line up. There they are right there, yeah. As from our point of view. Now, what's special about this is when you're looking at it from the inside, it's how the planets would line up during the equinox, and when from the outside, from the solstice. That's absolutely brilliant observation. But what makes this, I think, special to me is that if you look at Venus, which is right next to the moon's obvious, but Venus looks like a crescent as well.
Yeah.
Now, Mercury is on here somewhere. I don't see it, but it's like off to the side. But Mercury and Venus are both depicted as crescents, unlike Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. He stopped at Saturn. I mean, of course, because he depicted what our ancients would have seen. But this makes sense. We can see all of the planets from Mars out as perfect spheres from Earth because the sun hits them directly. But the planets between us and the sun, Mercury and Venus, appear as crescents most of the time because we see the shadowed side of it, thus, you know, because they're between us and the sun. He depicted that in such a way that it's almost like you slap yourself on the forehead, like, of course. That's how they would have looked, you know? And also maybe it was a gentle way to piss off flat earthers for the foreseeable future. Nothing against them at all. I get along great with Jay Dreamers and we love each other very much, but the Mercury and Venus appear as crescents, dude. And you can get a telescope and look for yourself, you know?
It almost looks like it's meant for an alignment, like they're meant to set into there, like it's a moment in time that he's marking here.
Right.
Maybe those planets are supposed to set into those crescents. Possibly.
Oh, I could see that. Yeah, it's like there's a code involved in it, you know? Everything he did was in code, you know, mathematical. He's a man of such few words that he spoke through his work, you know?
Right. I think if you're taking the electric universe model and you're applying it to a lot of what Ed Leedskalnin did, which, you know, really does have a lot to do with this electrical model of the universe, then you can see how these alignments would be very propitious. You know, you're getting something back for when these things are lining up. And in his work, he wrote several little books about electromagnetic energy. And in those works, he's saying this is pointing to something bigger, but we don't have a big, you know, resource base of people looking into and researching Ed Leedskalnin. That's why I think it's very important that we have shows like this, is because people can get interested in Coral Castle and then get into his books on electromagnetics and start to form things of their own.
Right.
I was going to pull out a perpetual motion holder that I've actually constructed, so I'll bring that back in just a couple seconds.
Dude, I would love to see that because, so I had the pleasure of reading Ed's book called Magneticity, I think, or I think it's called Magneticity. And he talks about having he ran a light bulb, like this big lantern, on electromagnetic energy perpetuating on itself for years, and it kept on working until after he died. And what's so fun about the book is that it's damn near literally incoherent. It's the sentences are bad. And this is a man, he did not care about punctuation and spelling and sentence structure, dude. He was a simple dude, but he was just so advanced. It almost hints at savantism in a way. You know, he was limited in certain regards, but because of those limitations, he was so advanced in the other areas.
Well,
now, go ahead.
Well, just to the point of electromagnetism, it was said that when he found the site in Florida, that he was using witching rods to find it.
Right.
Yeah.
So he was literally looking for something, and when he found it, he knew what he found. So
and that's exactly what I was going to get into, is this idea of these magnetic ley lines that he was working with, and the fact that he had built Coral Castle, and then he believed that the ley line had moved, and he actually, you know about this whole story of the trucks and him moving the blocks and basically sending the drivers away, and they would come back, and they had to end up using, what was it, the solid tires, because the blocks were so heavy that they popped the regular just tires.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So he ended up, because of the magnetic ley line aspect of where he, was working with, essentially, it had moved. So he moved the whole crystal, or the whole Coral Castle.
Yep. Yeah, it was two different places.
Right.
That is wild.
Yo, two different. How do I go?
I heard when he bought the place that the real estate broker who sold it to him was like, really? Like, don't you know this is going to be useless? Like, you can't do anything. No. I must have this spot.
Right.
And
like
he kind of started off. Many the ley lines, the aquifer, many, who knows? But he, like you said, with the divining rod, he was already like,
right.
And he had to find the right stone too.
Right.
Yeah.
So right here is Edley Scalnon's perpetual motion holder design.
Yeah.
Basically, it's so super simple. You've just got two coils here that you can charge with a 9-volt battery and a loop that's completed by a magnet, right? And so basically what he's saying is, as you apply the 9-volt battery to these different coils, that somehow the magnet keeps the energy flowing between those coils forever. So this thing can be buried now, and that charge would still be in it as long as that battery's there. Now, to measure this charge, you would have to put one line over here, one line over here, and then a circuit between them, like a simple light bulb, right? And as you pull the magnet away, you'll see that light bulb light up. So I've seen people do experiments where they've kept this thing in stasis for like 6 months, and then they'll come back with the light bulb and they'll still get that charge. So for some reason, electricity is able to continue pulsing on these coils for basically infinity. Now, that's not supposed to happen, and it's something you can prove to yourself real quick, that the laws of electronics that we have right now are not sufficient.
Right. That's incredible, because it'll run as long as until the bulb burns out, because that's actually what he used too, was a bulb.
Well, it won't actually keep that much of a charge. So like this will be like 4 volts, but it'll keep it infinitely. So the bulb between the two, it'll just flash real quick, just to show you that, there is some sort of charge going on inside there, even though you're not applying any sort of electrical energy. So what that proves is that at some point, this stuff is always rotating and always keeping that same motion, because whether it's a charge or whether it's, physical motion, you've also got something else happening that's keeping the charge. So it's a real quick and easy device, but basically it shows you that the laws that we have in terms of electromagnetics are not sufficient.
So now the crank, they have what they suspect is some sort of a device with the crank that he was using. Does anybody know anything about that?
Yeah, I've heard a little bit about it. He had a small box. It's been pictured, a small box above it, and a crank. And whatever's in the box has been a mystery.
Right.
Right.
It's kind of like a come along. So basically, he was saying he was lifting all these things with this simple crank, but there's absolutely no way. Like the other devices that he had in that box, they were just like rusty old tools that, how could that possibly help you out? So I think that was just sort of like a misdirection thing.
I think I was going to say that as well. Do you think he was using levers and pulleys, or just general?
There's footage of him using levers and pulleys, but unfortunately not for anything big. There's footage of him doing that for the chairs and a couple of the blocks that decorate the outside skirts. But I'll tell you what, man, looking at that device that you held there, it's inspiring. I wish I had the engineering degree, or I should say, because it's so simple, just the resources to create something upscaled from that, big enough to create electricity for a neighborhood. I'd gladly take 2 bullets to the back of the head and get suicided for bringing something like that to the light of day.
Well, I was thinking, what if you use this as a microcircuit? So like you could get this down to a like molecular size right now, because it's so simple.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you be able to scale it down that much? And we're talking about having those charges inside of a computer that can now, basically keep a charge for as long as it wants to.
Or a phone.
Or a phone, right? So if you're going to incorporate that into microcircuitry, you change the game overnight. But again, nobody's looking at this stuff.
No.
And all it would take is just a couple of eyes from the engineering departments that are making microchips to figure out, hey, I could use that tens of thousands of times in this redundant circuit, and we don't have to worry about, let's say, what do you call them? The huge astral ejections from the sun.
Yeah.
That's major, but again, nobody's looking, so nobody knows.
I think it takes an element of bravery to see what happens to a list of these guys who come up with various things, not just Nikola Tesla, but the guy who made his car run on water. He died in the desert because his car broke down in the desert 100 miles from his house. Doesn't make any sense. And I mean, everyone's kind of familiar with that list of people, but and then you'll have guys like Neil deGrasse Tyson will go on an interview and be like, well, those items never worked. They couldn't be replicated. And you just want to squeeze them and be like, dude, you must know why they weren't replicated. You must know. But
so what year was the guy that broke down in the water car?
Oh, I'm not positive. I know it was modern though, because there's full colored pictures of him. Yeah. To me, it seemed like the 90s, but.
So there was in the 70s, Andrei Puharich, which we just talked about the other night. He has a patent filed for, and he was driving around in the early 70s with a water-run motorhome.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Proof.
Yeah. There's all kinds of these anomalous technologies that, that's the whole thing when you get into the idea of anything that is beyond the understanding of modern science appears to be some sort of magic.
Right. And we treat it like that.
Yeah, like H.G. Wells, I think, said that. But that's the whole thing is there's all of these, when you get into toroid fields, when you get into, these moving magnetic lines, when you get into like this charging device, Headless, that these are things that have potential if somebody like Tesla or somebody like Lead Skulman, can somehow, that's the whole thing, making it a viable thing that can be a useful product.
Right.
So the guy we're talking about, one of them, because there were actually several different people who came up with energy saving or free energy devices in that year, was Stanley Meyer. And he was an Australian guy who made a water car out of a dune buggy, right? And in the process, he had several people come to him and try to buy it off of him, but they would do nothing with it. And so the last words he actually spoke were, "I've been poisoned."
Yeah.
And he died because he met with these people and somebody poisoned him. Right. So and he's not alone. There's so many other different inventors
yeah.
in the field. It's because nobody wants to take that leap outside of the society they're given. You know, all the
Petrodollar too.
I was gonna say, yeah, you get into who is the force behind wanting to suppress such energies. You know,
Right. Our money's tied to oil now. There's no way our government's letting that go away.
right?
But really, when you think about it, these guys are the mystics of our age. The Lead Scallions, the Teslas, all of these people are pointing to much more ancient ways of thinking and ancient ways of seeing the world that now we have to go back and try and figure out because it's not immediately apparent to us.
But that's what it was important about Ed's work, is that he made it clear that each individual person can be their own king and have their own system. To live off grid for Ed was nothing, and he did it effortlessly. And he warned us in a way about depending on a society, a government, or a power grid, that it inevitably makes us all slaves to something that we depend on, rather than harnessing the infinite amount of power and gravity and light and everything around us that is surrounding us all the time. Water, these, there's underwater aquifers everywhere. I mean, Florida was a good one for Ed, right. But they are pretty much everywhere, and they're streamlined. So you could build a commune of people along an underwater aquifer. There's one in St. Louis that no one even knows about because it's under the ground, but we ignore it. We build buildings right on top of it. Some of the older ones look like they might have harnessed it, but we can't prove that. But each person can be sovereign in their own regard. But as you guys had mentioned a moment ago, that's devastating to those who are in control.
Well, and you go back to all the ancient, maybe not all of them, but a majority of them, of the big ones, the pyramids and the temples, they were all built on top of aquifers or springs. Right. There's this inherent thing about the motion of water, Yeah. Yeah.
Do you happen to know where he sourced
the water? Came from a lake, Okeechobee. I'm saying that wrong.
Okeechobee.
Okeechobee. There you go.
Yeah.
But the limestone that he used, do you know where he sourced that from?
I am not positive. As far as I know, the majority of it is coral. You can see though that tub right there is, of course, plastered in something that was some kind of cement that he made, some kind of liquid or whatever. But I'm not sure where he quarried the coral from. That's a damn good point, though.
It's interesting because when Nick told me about this, I started looking up stuff, and they were talking about that it's specifically an Oolithic limestone, and it's funny because the Pentagon was used. Oolithic limestone was used to make the.
Really?
Yeah, I think they quarried that from Indiana or something, but it's interesting that they use almost similar stone.
Yeah.
I had thought that he got the site and sourced the megaliths from the coral itself, but I could be wrong. And
could be.
The solar system megaliths and so forth, and the whole schematics, it makes me, and you guys mentioned it earlier, that he's encoding something, and it wasn't there this rumor anyway, I believe, I don't know, but he seemed to do a lot of his work overnight.
Yeah.
Right.
The moonlight. So the mainstream narrative, and this is probably half correct, is that he did it to be secretive because no one ever really saw him do the big stuff. But in his book, like Magneticity, he goes on and on about the moon's magneticity and how it can be harnessed through water. So something about the moon's gravity, we know it affects the tides, and we know it affects the water within our biological system. I mean, that you can look at stats on crime and stuff, blah, blah, the full moon. But the moon also has an effect on underground water. And whenever pressure occurs between quartz and limestone, you get what is called piezoelectricity.
Electricity, yeah.
Right. And now how he got that piezoelectricity to do some of the things that it did, I don't know, because he kept that part a secret. But he always leads us right up to the water, pun intended. And then he stops right there and says, you got to figure out the rest for yourself. Most notably, the red door, which still haunts me.
Just to that point, so this is a limestone calcite, and it's made from on the ocean floor. So this is all made from bone, and then it's crystallized. The calcite is a crystalline that forms into the pores. So it's made from life, and bones are piezoelectric, right? And so are crystals. So
yeah,
just interesting.
That would do it.
No, if you live somewhere on like by the water long enough, you start to realize how the moon governs the tides throughout the season, and how you have to when you're going to launch and when you're going to come on shore and stuff like that, tides and stuff, depending on summer and winter and stuff like that. And it's pretty fascinating that. And when you said something about how he had done everything during moonlight, it almost made me think of the color, the purple color, the royal purple color. How you can find that color when I guess some of the shells of the mollusks expose their ink, and it's developed overnight in the moon or whatever, and so the day you see the color purple coming out because of the exposure to moonlight.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So
that was a secret process that they held.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I guess to keep on talking about the moon, I did want to get to this picture actually. Joey, this is what you were saying is considered like the moon actually for the planets that he was showing, right?
Dude, this when I got to the moon fountain part of writing my episode, I had to take deep breaths and like go for a walk just to be able to articulate it as correctly as possible, because what he did right here is absolutely impossible and fascinating. And it's one of those things that I'll probably never get over. But just the first one, to keep it simple, whenever they asked him why a fountain? Why do you make it the moon fountain? Why is there water? He just said, moon has water. That was his full sentence, just the 3 words, moon has water. And he wouldn't elaborate on that. 72 years later, India sent a probe to the moon or whatever and found ample amounts of water. No one knew. In fact, it would have been mocked, and he was, for saying that the moon had water. That was absolutely ridiculous at the time. We now know that it does. And what is most crazy about this ledge right here, see that little uprise around the to the right of the screen, is different from the rest of it. So obviously the around the outside represents the crust of the moon, and he wasn't shy about that either. But the if you look at either side of the moon fountain, you have the crescent moons that have an orientation involved that show that that's the back of the moon, the part that we don't see. The dark, it's often called the dark side of the moon, we know better, but say the far side of the moon is thicker and bigger on Ed's model for a reason. Even later than 1972, so I should say 72 years later or whatever, but even after we found water on the moon, they used some kind of laser scanning technology that's outside of my pay grade, and found that the crust of the moon is much thicker, 7 miles thicker on the far side of the moon than it is facing us, which is an anomaly. It's on its own. It's an anomaly, first of all, because we didn't know that planetary bodies did that. It's uneven. So how does it tidally lock to us if the thicker portion is facing away? That's weird.
That would give some reason as to why it stays in geocentric orbit with that side, because it's weighed, and so it stays to the outside as far as the natural pull. Yeah,
sounds on purpose.
Think about it. So they say that the moon is hollow, and if the back side of the moon is thicker than the front that side,
Right.
then that means that it's a resonance chamber. It's bouncing off the backside of the moon, kind of like a satellite dish.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I can dig that. I like that. Whew. This gets deep.
Yeah.
But even the size and radius of that little portion on the moon fountain is accurate to the 7 miles difference that the moon's crust has. I don't think he went up there, but somehow he calculated that was the case by understanding gravity.
And you could fly into that pool too. It's perfect for looking at the moon.
Reflective, yeah. And then that star in the middle, there's gears in his tool shaft that fit right on top of it. And that's a fact, but what's rumored is that he used to hang these black boxes, much like the one that he had on his tripod mentioned earlier, on either one of the crescent moon fountain things on the side, and he would hang those down from there and wrap the whole thing in these wires that hooked up to the center gear, or the gear hooked up to the center star of this fountain here. And this cement stuff that he used is, like she said, is made out of that limestone that is conductive, same as pyramids.
Well, and interestingly, besides the stars that are used by various groups, when you get into the alchemical aspects of the upward-facing and downward-facing pyramid, you're actually taking fire and water and combining them to create some sort of an energy to be able to facilitate doing something. So there's as far as representative symbology, and then if you have some sort of a device that you're talking about, gears that you're putting on top of that, and then you're incorporating the moonlight into the water. Very interesting.
What you're saying is a stark reminder that we don't get symbology out of nothing. It's not from imagination alone. Alchemical symbols and hieroglyphs, all of these things are attributed to the imagination of ancient people. Right. This is a reflection of a device, and it makes you wonder if it's true. Like Judy K. King talks about, hieroglyphics are not necessarily pictograms. They're biological equations, more attuned to mathematics than they are pictograms. And this tetrahedron, I think is the word, is tetrahedron. I don't want to mess that up, but the upside down triangle and the right side up triangle interlocked and working together is sacred geometry that I think is useful as a utility, not just pretty to look at.
Well, in Thoth or Tahuti, when he met Metatron, when Enoch was translated into Metatron, he rode around in a tetrahedron that was a vehicle that he manifested for the use of creating energy to do what he needed to do. So it's an ancient symbol, but to have understanding of the symbolism versus translating that into actually being able to manipulate physical reality with mechanisms is a step.
Right. It's like the Egyptian Ankh. You learn, they tell us it's a symbol for life, and it's the most umbrella cover thing. So what isn't a symbol for life? It's so silly. And then when you actually get past that explanation, that mainstream explanation, and you look at the coffer texts, they talk about it's a device. It's made out of gold, crystal, quartz, and a couple other elements that we use in our phones today. It makes me wonder if it was a plasma mechanism used to communicate with something otherworldly, if not communication at a long distance, because they're seen holding it in hieroglyphics up to their nose, up to their nasal passages. And the nose is, the senses of the nose are hooked directly to the brain. It's like even faster than the eyes, supposedly.
Yeah.
So I think that oftentimes we look at ancient technology and then we very quickly call it a symbol or a pictogram.
Yeah. We do.
One thing that I was going to insert is that, to Robbie's point, is that the tetrahedron, and then if you, the 369, which is
Right.
vortex map, that heavily relies on vibrational energy theory, and to explain how things kind of coalesce in that whole area. But it seems like he had a lot of that 369 theme throughout his, his structures. And so the tetrahedron as well is pretty much the whole basis of 369.
Right.
Yeah. I think that he greatly admired Nikola Tesla as well. Mr. Ed did. And even though he kind of lives within the shadow of Nikola, you can see the resemblance there.
Do you think he met him? It was rumored that he met him.
I was
in New
about
York.
to say, how cool would it be to have a coffee with the two of these guys, huh? If I could learn to talk, that would be fascinating.
It's part of the legend and lore that he may have met him, and people said that he did, but back then there's so many rumors. So
Right.
they were in New York at the same time.
Right. Yeah. See, that's I don't doubt the rumors there. It's almost one of those things where his work is concrete in this stone here, and the things that we can prove are beautiful. And it's worth speculating, though, that some of the rumors might be true, because the things that we're looking at right here in this picture, if it was a rumor, you'd be like, no.
In this doorway, this is a very interesting doorway. Just the fact that it is precisely balanced, and just you can barely touch it, and it will swing.
Well, not
I've heard
anymore, but
I was gonna say I heard that something happened.
This is my favorite story, if I might jump on this one. So, a child could push it open. And side note, how do you find a center of gravity on a behemoth like that with a million different variables of weight?
How big is that stone?
So that is 9 tons.
9 tons,
as far as they wrote in the book. Yeah. And the reason they know it's 9 tons is because it was the one thing that was driving engineers crazy. As much as his work was refused, the engineers were like, okay, we got to know how that thing worked. So after he died, of course, engineers went out of their way to take it down and look on the inside and figure it out. What they saw on the inside, they looked at each other and scratched their heads. They're like, this should not be able to do what it does. It was a disc and a hole drilled straight through the thing, a tiny little hole drilled. It didn't have any sort of like truss that went through it or whatever. It was breaking the question, how did he drill through that stone? Where does he get a drill that long? But nevertheless, the best part is they were like, they gave up trying to figure out how it worked, because they were like, this doesn't make any sense. They put it back up and never worked again. Engineers broke the door of professional engineers broke the door of Coral Castle.
So screwed up.
That's a shame.
Yeah.
So I was going to throw in there, recently they've discovered that the asteroid Sirius is 144 times smaller than the moon, and the moon is 144 times smaller than the Earth. And somehow this ratio reflects how the moon was constructed, because they say that they don't know where all the material came from that struck the Earth, that created the moon. And they're not really sure why a moon this large would be around a planet our size. So it don't make sense. Well, what they found is that the material probably came from the asteroid belt.
Right.
And the asteroid belt where Sirius is, and Sirius is the biggest asteroid, is supposed to have, the material that went into constructing the moon. So somehow these two planets are kind of involved in each other, and it looks like the moon was constructed deliberately.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
and the fact that NASA has said that the moon is made out of silicon dioxide, and they bombed it with various, satellites, and they said it rung like a bell because it's hollow. And what is it? Silicon dioxide is just glass. So it literally, it's a sort of a glass menagerie hanging in the sky.
It's radioactive.
So on the moon, if you're going to be making a glass from the material that's used for moon dust, you get a lot of titanium dioxide. And if you're making titanium dioxide glass on the moon in that lower gravity environment, you're going to get glass that is stronger than steel. And so if that's really what this thing is constructed out of, that thing is, almost unbreakable. Like if you're going to compare that to anything.
Right. That's the kind of materials we would use to build a reinforcing structure in ironworking or to the skeleton of a building. And what makes that crazy is that, and this is conspiracies might arise out of this fact, but what's not a conspiracy is that the moon rock is older than the Earth, and the moon rock on the surface of the moon is older than the moon rock beneath. They drilled down, and they're like, down further is the newer rock. The only time we see that on Earth is whenever we pull the rock out and lay it on the surface because we got to get down there. Right. What? Not to mention the fact that the thing doesn't spin. There's no other moons that don't spin in our solar system.
It does spin in perfect accordance with the Earth.
Right. Geocentric.
That's the most amazing part, because to get that mathematics right, you would have to be,
Yeah. Well, there is some ancient talk that Thoth drove the moon into place, and Thoth was the dark side of the moon as the secret wisdom, yeah.
The Zulu people talk about 12,800 years ago, there was a great flood because the water canopy vapor above us collapsed to the ground because, and this is what the Zulus say, reptiles living inside of a giant egg called the moon rolled up into place and then hatched. And if you take what we know about mythology, which is oftentimes they didn't have the technical terms and scientific jargon that we do now, they spoke of the world the way that they understood. Well, what does that tell us? First of all, they nailed it with the date concerning the Younger Dryas. They nailed it with the Great Flood concerning the same time period. They nailed it with what the atmosphere would be like without the moon. And then you sprinkle reptiles on top of it and you go, what's going on?
Reptiles, I don't know.
Yeah. I've never seen reptilians on the moon, but the Zulu people said that that's where they're hanging out. And if they nailed the rest of it, at what point do we say, okay, you guys got all that stuff right, but you got this last part wrong? And that's kind of what they do with Ed here is, he proved that piezoelectric energy and electromagnetism can do these extraordinary things. And they're like, okay, he got all that right because the proof is in the pudding, but what he did get wrong was his way of doing it. Well, I don't know if he got that wrong either, because we might be in denial.
Well, you got a 9-ton door swinging over you.
Is there? Go ahead.
They don't know how he quarried it either, and he did quarry these blocks.
He must have.
So not only did he put these and move these, somehow he cut them, and there's no tool marks apparently. Right. So, incredible.
Was the assigning of the zip code before or after this was constructed? Have you checked out the zip code?
What is it?
33033.
Really?
Oh.
That's interesting.
At what point do we say that coincidences have gone from evidence to proof, Yeah. That's crazy.
Damn. Yeah, that is interesting. Wow.
I think we accidentally, as a society, will name things, and we will we'll assign numbers to things unconsciously, attributing it. In the Grand Canyon, all the features of the Grand Canyon are attributed to Hindu and Egyptian gods, and it's claimed that was an accident. Meanwhile, there's a lot of anomalies with the Grand Canyon that are very mysterious, that associate with some kind of ancient civilization that might have predated both Hindu and Egyptian,
Right.
both of which seem to be a branch off from a prior civilization that is unheard of to us, possibly Atlantis or whatever. But if you ever get a chance to follow the Kincaid story, he found all those relics in the Grand Canyon, and then he committed suicide shortly afterwards, as you do. And they covered it up as best they could. But to this day, if you go to visit that spot, it's prohibited for your safety.
Right.
Well, you don't want to go kill
Yeah, and
yourself.
it's actively guarded too. Like
Yeah.
you can, people try to sneak in there, and then they film Black Hawk helicopters. flying
Black
out over them.
helicopters, dude. Yeah.
Wasn't there some other things too that the way this place was built? I think it kind of you would be able to see alignments through certain holes or the structure.
You got the he calculated the sidereal year with the telescope, the North Star Polaris, the Polaris Telescope.
Right.
Is what he used to calculate the sidereal year, because you could see Polaris through one of the 4 quarters of the wires that he put through the little top of it. The eyepiece happens to be a triangle. That's fun. It doesn't really have any bearing on it, but the eyepiece didn't need to be a triangle, but it just so happens to be a perfect triangle. And he placed the Polaris Telescope on the outside of the castle on purpose. So it splits the entire castle down left and right into 2 different hemispheres, which he equated to the hemispheres of the brain far before it was popular to do so. We used to think that the brain was one big, mushy, magical unit that did everything, but we now know today that it's the 2 hemispheres have strict jobs of their own. But it wasn't just the Polaris Telescope. There was oh man, I might have to bust that book out too to save myself from watching my own episode, but it's hard to remember.
I know there was
each
something.
individual thing.
Unfortunately, one of the reasons why I even remember it is because I think like the propaganda, in my opinion, about why it was there. Wasn't there like 2 things in a wall where it looked like it was cut? They were saying they were putting their heads in there and keeping them there.
Yeah.
Didn't that align with something?
Yeah, so the Gemini stone. So Gemini, the zodiac is 2. It's duality, and so he had the 2 holes there. And in the roof of the Gemini chamber thing, there was a hole that had a little timepiece below it, so that you could tell not the time of day, but the day of year. The time of day thing we should actually talk about here in a moment, though, because that's the But you could tell the day of year by the way the sun came into that particular room. And this was along with several other zodiacal figures that he made out of stone, because he was replicating what the ancients used to do. Now, as you mentioned, though, if you take a tour guide into Coral Castle, he'll tell you that the Gemini holes were to put the heads of his Sweet 16 and the child that she would bear so he could beat them. And I don't think he would have signed off on that explanation. He was a very kind and very gentle man. And I don't say we, but just like everything else, the Sun Couch, the way they tell tourists these stories is not only fabricated, but they admit that it's fabricated. Like, they'll go that far, but I think that it's misleading on purpose.
Well, the Sweet 16 thing, he had an obsession with 16, and it was rumored that it was possibly 16 magnets in his device. I don't know where that came from.
Well, if you look at it, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. So that's just compounding duplication, something that the ancients did on a regular basis. And one might argue that the ancients did it because that's how cells duplicate as well. That's how everything duplicates.
Right.
So 16 makes sense. And also, I don't think he was a pedophile. He didn't even express sexuality anywhere in any way, shape, or form.
It's interesting that he included the human representation of the mind in the construction, as have all these many other megalithic sites. It seems to have that correspondence, whether he was trying to say something beyond the esoteric, like the mechanical operation. I kind of always wondered that, just seeing the site, and him withholding the information, like how is there a way to...
I often wonder if he was withholding information. People often say that he was hiding secret information, but frankly, not only was he illiterate, but back then we didn't have the words for how the brain works. The brain chemistry is new. So I think that he was expressing something that he did know the best that he could to get it across as clear as he could. But frankly, he didn't have the words for it. And if someone else did at the time, he certainly wouldn't have either. And that shows us why, if you look at Hindu and Egyptian iconography, it looks like anatomy. And they point directly to the pituitary gland, the pineal gland, the pelvic region. All of these things are in succession in hieroglyphs that say almost clearer than scientific anatomy jargon does, because they'll show you, it's like this figure leads to this. That's the pelvic region to the backbone. The backbone's represented by this, and then it goes up to the neck where you have that little ram creature or whatever, leads to the hemispheres of the brain, and then it shows the eye of Horus up at the top of it as if it's the last in the sequence. So it looks like the pituitary gland, and there's like a flowing river between the pituitary gland and the pineal gland representation. And what is that if not Kundalini? Which we have pharaohs with that snake coming up out of their forehead. When you put those two things together, it's almost indispensable to try to ignore it, but the proof is in what they did and how they conducted their activity. We get rid of the idea that they had slaves, which I think is by now all the way out the window, and because everyone involved with all of the projects would have had to be supremely educated in geometry, which doesn't happen in the case of slavery. But I think that Ed did the best he could to tell us what he could, but he didn't have the language to do so, especially back then. And I guess we can get to the red door thing maybe at the end or whatever. It's a great ending, but that was the wild one.
Well, if he's messing...
In July 1st, 1963, that's when the zip code system was introduced. So that was definitely
long after.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, if he's messing with electromagnetism, you're messing with the secrets of the mind itself. Right. Because we fire, it's all electromagnetism, and so it's all the way down. So the ancients, it's the monolith, all that stuff. It's piezoelectric stone, the pyramids, like you guys are saying with the pyramid power.
Right.
But once you start harnessing that, it's said that it unleashes something in your mind too. Right. You're not just bringing that stuff down or bringing it up, that it actually enhances your body. It makes seeds more fertile and all that stuff. So
it's like we are that. And that's why these things often represent the human body, because it's not such a leap to think that we are a reflection of our environments. Everything is sentient if you carry the mind before matter worldview. But we are a condensed conscious form of our own environment. So we live by the same laws of nature as everything else does, between the moon, the tides, stone, mineral, plant life. It's like we are an amalgamation of all of those things together that have alchemized into something that can reflect on itself, and that's extraordinary. And if you ask me, that's itself disclosure. That is proof of something bigger, because it's not random. If you take the alchemical process of minerals and magneticity, electromagnetic force, plasma, or as Aristotle would say, the four elements, and you amalgamate them into a human form, and you see Fibonacci sequence within us. You know, you got 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and then onward down the legs.
Yep.
It's a design. It's very clearly a design, because if it's not a design, that means that random happen chance things must have happened before us billions of times over before it got to us, which we don't see evidence of. We happened seems to be almost instantly. I mean, we share a lot of traits with other creatures, but yeah, it's.
If I can insert something before y'all get into the red door, I think Nick will like this. So it looks like he existed on a diet of sardines, and so quickly, totally sent off signals, because sardines is extremely high in EPA and DHA, which is a fatty acid and omega-3.
Right.
And those specific combinations help extremely with retinal health, but for sure night vision.
Wow.
And not night vision, but it also helps with cognition, mood stabilization, as well as memory. But what you had said about the pineal, which is directly linked to mood, is that the pineal sits in a bath of cerebral spinal fluid. And so it is thought that the moon, or the light from the moon, and the radiation from the moon influences the pineal at nighttime, especially during a full moon. And it'll prime it in a way that it, I guess, allows it to receive a lot of more signaling from the electromagnetic spectrum that exists during the day. So just
wow. So, like, first of all, why is everything that's good for us gross, and everything that's tasty is just bad for us? What a cosmic fact that is. But if the moon is having your pineal gland act as a transducer, or like an antenna receiver, then that means, I mean, well, and we know that sun gazing is the best.
I was just going to say that, yeah.
It primes us for it, right?
Well, and then that gets into, alternatively, moon gazing.
Yeah.
In regard to taking that night light and bringing it in, and like you're saying, bathing the internal function of the body itself with that light.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, because if you're talking about moon priming, and the one thing that helps you with moon priming is the one thing that comes from a medium that is influenced by moons,
right.
by the moon, is the ocean. And so it just kind of all builds upon itself, which I think is pretty, synchronistic.
Right. And synchronistic is exactly the right word, because we are designed, it seems, to receive all of the above in perfect harmony. There's nothing in that conjunction that doesn't suit us. There's nothing on Earth that isn't either utilized or directly necessary for the human body to exist. It's like there's nothing extra and there's nothing lacking.
Something I did want to ask, maybe your opinion about this, man, also. And when I ask this, I don't mean it in a derogatory term. Do you think the guy might have been an occultist or an alchemist in himself?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we'll never know. We will have no idea. But there's not a doubt in my mind that a man who says, I have discovered the secret of the Great Pyramid, right, is not running around without occult knowledge and alchemy. Yeah. I mean, like, and that goes into fashion with people who are truly tied to those secret societies who have that information. They don't talk about it. And if you hear a guy talking about that he is, I just got my Mason card or whatever.
You go back to the Magi, and you go back to the Zadoks, and you go back to these different groups that held these secrets, and consistently they were passed down through family bloodlines. Right. Like the father would teach the son, and the mother would teach the daughter, and
I kind of wish it wasn't based in nepotism. That's not fair to the rest of us, but all the presidents are related. I guess I think everybody knows that by now.
George the Third, yeah.
What's that about? Yeah.
What's that about?
It's not healthy.
No, it's not.
Because what happens is you get a child in the bloodline who is not, capable, but he gets that power, and then he just runs with it Like that's like a demiurgos microcosm, you know, just messing shit up.
His whole life strikes me as a really kind of the full traveler, explorer, learning things from wherever, and the, I mean, his whole construction, of course, but this idea that he only ate sardines is so fascinating, and makes me think that he was, as you mentioned earlier, it wasn't that he was withholding; he was just trying his best in his format to be able to communicate what he was. Maybe it seems like he was highly intuitive and getting, like, I don't know why I like sardines, but that's all I eat, because I know something made me feel that way. I don't know. It seems like just a very intuitive story.
That's a great hypothesis, though, because it makes you wonder if the sardines things, along with everything else, was previous knowledge passed down or intuition, because we just got off that long spiel about how we have everything and nothing extra. If you're truly in tune with all of that stuff combined, wouldn't you not find necessity in books? Like, well, he was illiterate. Maybe everything was natural to him.
Do you think that's possible?
Well, I do know that the Greeks and Romans loved fish paste more than any other food. Their big thing was fish.
Yes.
Yeah, and what they would do is they would ferment these fishes out in the sun for like 6 weeks, and then crush it all up.
For miles coming in. Yeah.
It was the most horrific smell, and it would just permeate the entire Mediterranean.
Yep.
And it's just this horrible paste that they would make from fermented fish parts, and then they'd separate out the fish oil from it. Right. So the fish oil would be used as well. So,
if I was given the choice between consuming that and ancient wisdom, I would just stay ignorant, because that is awful. Here in Missouri, there's moss in the rivers. God forbid that there's moss in the rivers, and everybody wants a nice sparkly river, but it caused the state to do something about all the moss by introducing carp. It was a very specific kind of carp, right? And this is what happens when you play God, because the carp are out of control now. You can't go fishing here anymore because the carp are in the way. If you take your boat, a little John boat, and you do circles, carp will jump out of the water by the dozens and they're this big, and they'll slap you in the head. And there's so many of them that we can no longer enjoy ourselves. We should have just kept the moss. But the reason I'm saying that is because the state issued a thing. They're like, if you catch a carp, do not release it, but also do not take it home and eat it. We want you to throw them away. And so what people do for sport even now is that they'll get a boat load of these carp, bring it back to shore, and they'll just throw all of the fish away in the dumpsters, in the trash. Yeah. Now we have a third, far worse problem, is that now you can't have a picnic because it's the worst stench you can possibly imagine.
I love it when humans interact with the environment.
Yeah. We try to make it better. It's like we're something special.
Yeah.
It's nonsense.
Is there anything else anybody wanted to bring up before we get to the door?
I'm going to try to find this book. Well, I'm going to one more attempt to just try to find this book because I want to be able to show the pictures of it.
Sure.
This is, it looks organized, but it ain't.
And now this place is open to the public too. People can go down there, right, and get tours and stuff.
Right. I mean, they'll feed you a bunch of nonsense when you get there, but you know. I just threw it up here, I guess, and I didn't care to. Maybe it's down here somewhere, but you almost got to see Provine's model that he built around the red door, because it's a true reflection of something that Ed would have done. Maybe I threw the book away, dude. Like, what am I doing?
It happens. What do you got over there, Headless? You got a book in your hand?
I was just going to plug this book again, Fourth Phase of Water by Gerald Pollack. We keep talking about how consciousness is tied to water, the moon is tied to water, your pineal gland is tied to water. Well, the fourth phase of water talks about a different type of sort of semi-solid plasma that forms when water interacts with sunlight, interacts with other particles. And it's so ubiquitous, but yet so unstudied. If people give Gerald Pollack a chance and read that book, they will be amazed at what he's found when it deals with electromagnetism and water. And then you've got people like Veda Austin on Instagram who are doing experiments with ice, where they can actually get pictures to form in the ice just by thinking thoughts at this substance. Something else is going on with water, and we gotta get into it.
The water seems to be some sort of like a memory mechanism, or like a storage, like CPU for reality, in regard to maintaining, holding, and relating the events that it experiences as it processes through.
I think we talked about that on the water episode, didn't we? I think someone brought it up about it, like holding information stuff, or even being used as like a way to transport, I think, information.
Yeah.
Right. Well, the way that Gerald Pollack talks about it in this book is through the easy zone. And so the easy zone is formed around particles that are hydrophilic. So they are water-loving particles. When it does that, there are certain molecules that will kick out of the easy zones and then create sort of like a punch card. So you've got sort of a mechanical way of determining what was in the water just by examining the structure of these molecules. Well, that perfectly describes the idea of the medicine where you're only taking a part of a part of a part in water. What's that called? Something with an H. Homeopathic medicine, right? There's the mechanical element of homeopathic medicine right there, and Gerald Pollack has proved it in his book. So I don't know why people have these hang-ups when it comes to actual physical science. We're on the path to discovering great things about water, but is anybody paying attention?
Can I add that all those things that you just brought up, Headless, are so correspondence in their subtlety, but their power, right? And so the Coral Castle, there was some subtle things that he was working on that were obviously monolithic power. Same thing with homeopathy and water. It's the potential in water is super subtle, but the force of it is very powerful.
Right.
Yeah, Ed's rocking chairs were hooked up to gears and pulleys and levers and stuff that went directly to his little underground aquifer chamber that had a spiral staircase, by the way, just like Nikola Tesla's did. I don't know if that was a fashion thing or if it's a utility purpose, and that's another thing that ties them to Nikola Tesla as well, is they designed very similar aquifers. Of course, Ed didn't quite have the budget that Nikola Tesla did at the time, but yeah, there's something special about water. And someone mentioned water having a memory to it, like a molecular memory to it that's greater than any microchip. Can you imagine one day if we get the technology to actually view what the water remembers?
Right.
I mean, that would almost be a tsunami of information, pun intended. Yeah. We would almost not know what to do.
Yeah. You already do have the hardware. It's your body. Your body's
your body. Exactly.
Yeah.
People have been describing are experienceable through our ability to connect to water.
Yes.
It's just a matter of tapping into it, I suppose.
Yes.
Huh.
Speaking of aquifer, that's what limestone does in the soil. Whenever it rains, you have to have the proper grass systems and root systems, but when it rains, the water trickles down the long root systems of these native grasses, and they filter into the limestone that is inside the soil, and it holds the water almost like a sponge, and that is your natural aquifer.
I see.
Where most of your spring systems come from.
Noted.
And you've got the most amount of paranormal activity being related to karst topography, which is exactly what this whole area is. It's the aquifer type topography. You also get a lot of sinkholes too, because that limestone is very, very sensitive to pH. So that's why you've got these cave systems and everything else happening, because the acidic pH causes the limestones to break down, and that's what gives you a lot of cave systems as well.
Right.
Dude, so Andrew Collins was doing research on naturally occurring plasma, and he didn't really mean to get into anything paranormal, but this is where it took him, though, because he was like, okay, we're looking at UFOs, we're looking at ghost stories, we're looking at all this. He's like, okay, so he traced it back. He's like, UFO sightings and these things always seem to have an origin in folklore, like especially like Ireland, where there's certain areas that are super rich in fairies and whatnot. And then he's like, okay, these areas also seem to have megalithic structures, like even small megalithic structures that are hundreds of stones in circles. He's like, is that the causation of it? And then he went on further to find out that there's aquifers underneath all of these areas, begging the question, what's going on with the combination of water and electricity and maybe gravity that causes supernatural phenomenon that are just consolidated to these particular areas so readily, you know? It's almost as if there's a breach between worlds, or somehow, some way that plasmatic entities or some kind of consciousness can leak into our dense physical reality through these, dare I say, portals, but energy centers, right? Laylines.
They're creating a certain waveform, vibration, and frequency that allows these things to become amorphous.
Well, me and Nick have done a couple of shows on this this guy named Mansion Rollers on my other show, and he was talking about having dreams of going to these mound sites, you know, these sites that are basically built off of these earth energies, and seeing a whole bunch of people just sort of milling around, kind of speaking to each other telepathically. And what's interesting to me is we've got these telepathy tapes that are talking about kids who have severe autism to where they don't have, you know, physical speech, meeting up at places they call the Hill. And having a telepathic experience, sort of interacting with this, you know, universal unconsciousness at these places and sharing their experiences. So I wonder how directly tied it is to the natural earth energies that maybe ancient man was tapping into as a different form of technology than what we're currently used to.
Right.
I think that's the key, is the key word is different form of technology, because even though they're not doing the same things we are, which is mainly based in combustion, they were certainly using the same materials that we do. And I mean, who's the advanced culture in this case if what they didn't leave a carbon footprint that we can trace? Because the number one debunk for ancient technology is a lack of carbon footprint, to which anyone with a little bit of pattern recognition might look at and say, well, they didn't leave one. You know, and neither did Ed, and neither would have Nikola Tesla had he been given the chance.
Yeah, I live right where his Colorado Springs experiments were.
Yeah.
And the reason why he came out here, and this is where he wanted to send the power to New York, and it's the low air pressure, and being where we're at, the ionosphere, like a tendril, comes down and charges down.
Yeah.
And so he was really tapping into that. And it is like Mount Meru, you know, primordial mounds. It's in the high places.
Right.
Something comes down to meet you, or vice versa. Right.
It makes you wonder if that's how he got his ideas, because he reports in his own autobiography that he would see a flash of blue before getting his ideas. And sometimes the flashes of blue were so intense that the schematics for his inventions would be laid out in front of him in 3D. And if you read about what's the word, fluorescent phenomenon. I might have messed that up, but astronauts get it all the time when they're in low orbit, which is, by the way, pretty much the only orbit that astronauts go in, as far as I can tell. But nevertheless, these photons don't hesitate at matter. They're like plasma in a way that they go through anything, and they don't recognize matter as being solid. So the retina of these astronauts, they would see these flashes of blue because the sun rays were not in the way for them to be picking that up. And they would not report it to NASA because they would. So it was like 20 or so of these astronauts, they all got together and they were like, we're all seeing the same shit, right? Okay, if we report this together, they can't fire all of us, which is a shame that had to happen in the first place, but that's what they did. But it was enough that we now have a word for it and we now know it exists. Otherwise, we wouldn't have. But that begs the question about ancient shamans who used to go down into caves, because the way that we measure photons the same way, by going deep underground, and they would go into these caves, see these flashes of light, and then they would paint them on the walls, which we can look at today. It was once thought, by me including, that the reason they drew these cave paintings in the deep in the caves is because they would preserve them from not getting weathered, and that is true. I think some of them still have color.
I think what you're talking about is the neutrino pools, where they're actually using deuterium to measure the light output of these neutrinos as they're passing through the core of the Earth. And so if there is a neutrino connection, I think that would be very heavily tied to consciousness. We're made out of water too. And if this neutrino is interacting with us, and they say that there's a reverse neutrino stream, like it's almost a separate dimension moving backwards in time. That comes from the center of the Earth. Strange stuff is happening in that regards. Go ahead.
Yeah, tachyons as well. They spin backwards in time. So that's, interesting when you start to look at all the functions and forms of how these different particles act and interact with the processes of the internal temple itself.
It's like all of the rules of reality go out the window when we get down that deep into subatomic and so why do we feel the need to stay so strict to these rules of reality, knowing damn well that the very stuff that we're all made out of, that everything we can see is made out of stuff that doesn't adhere to the rules whatsoever,
Well, it goes into the idea of separate senses for a lot of different phenomena that we haven't really classified yet. If all of our mental filters that block out most of what we see and hear so that we can focus on the things in front of us are really doing their job, we need to understand what happens when we start to take down those mental filters. There's going to be a lot of stuff flashing in and out of our perception. Yeah. And I think that's important to note, because we are part of the environment. We are part of this planet. And as long as we keep those filters at such a high degree, we're never going to be experiencing what's really going on around us.
Yeah. I think Carl Jung popularized way ahead of his time the idea of the subconscious mind picking up everything in reality and filtering it out so that our conscious mind wouldn't go into insanity, because we have a survival mechanism that requires that we not see every little bitty detail. Autistic people, I think, don't have the pleasure of getting that filter as readily as we do, and you can kind of tell it, and I guess that would render anybody nonverbal, but it would also render somebody undistracted enough to have capabilities that they recognize naturally, like telepathy. And those telepathy tapes are absolutely fascinating.
Well, in the tapes, they talk about how the nonverbal autistic kids are typing. Right. And so this is how they've been able to communicate, is through typing. And so when they'll ask the kids what they're experiencing, a lot of them will talk about synesthesia as a main side effect. And they say that their minds are running faster than their bodies are capable of producing. That's why there's the disconnect, and they don't really have consciousness of their bodies until they start typing. So it's a strange sort of interaction. They're communicating at a different level, and it's only when they've been able to distill what they believe is other people's experiences that they can actually start to communicate with them.
Yeah.
Some sort of a hyper savantism.
Yeah.
Right.
The savantism to me is proof that like Ingo Swann says, everyone's favorite remote viewer extraordinaire for the CIA. He was talking about this is available to everybody.
Right.
And a savant who can, like Rain Man, do calculus off the top of his head, but is disabled in every other regard, is proof that if you laser focus your mind on one particular region, it'll have superpowers. Unfortunately, we can't make ourselves do that without years of meditation,
right,
and so on.
There was one point in the telepathy tapes, excuse my lisp, where one of them mentioned that the delta state, that scientists or observers of consciousness on the delta state have noted that it's the brain is off, and that it's therefore a weak state. And I'm sorry, I forgot the character who pointed this out, but the person pointed out that that's when your brain is most capable, right, when you are able to clear it out and shut it off, and that's when the things happen. And it reminds me very much of the Tibetan Buddhist idea of the cities, which were these psychic powers that were not to be sought after and not to be focused on or anything, but would happen as a result of the meditation process.
Byproduct,
so thank you. So just a very interesting correspondence what they're dealing with in their limited capacity to be embodied, but their mind and spirit is completely on. Whereas someone who's, capable of dealing with this physical reality, like most of us, we can pursue it in that other means, right? Or potentially, anyway.
Right. Yeah, there are studies showing that the neurotypical mind is doing 100 things at the same time, whereas in the case of savantism and autism, it's very few, but all of the power and energy of the brain is going directly into that one area. And I think that should not only be studied, but it should be harnessed. And that difference between the alpha and beta, and I forgot I'm not good with technical terms.
Theta,
they're talking, because for the longest time with DMT, it was hypothesized that the reason we see these visions is because the body goes to sleep and then the brain starts to dream. And it wasn't until not Hoffman, but the DMT guy,
Shulgin.
He wrote the Spirit Molecule.
That guy.
But he did those. He was like the first one to actually break it down. They found out that your brain is more awake in the case of DMT, more awake, more so than the average waking state. So it doesn't go to sleep.
Right.
We're not dreaming while on DMT. We're hyper awake.
Yeah, it opens up the neuroreceptor pathways so that you're taking in more information.
Right. Sometimes an overwhelming amount of information, which maybe gives us a glimpse into what autistic people are experiencing in a mild manner on a regular basis. Terrifying, if you ask me. I mean,
But it also brings up a lot of the divinatory practices. Like he was using dowsing. So basically, it's allowing your subconscious mind to come through your body and receiving signals from that. And if that's the way things are done, maybe there should be a lot more divining going on. Maybe that's how we sort of tap into this field.
Dude, that makes me wonder if 99% of the occult is a matter of bringing the subconscious mind up to recognition.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, was Lee Skullman, was he using, I know he was using dowsing rods, but was he using a pendulum?
Well, it's the same principle that applies in both areas. Is you're trying to get the biofeedback from your muscles in the objects you're holding. So I know the Nazis actually saved Il Duce during World War II because they were using dowsers, pendulum dowsers, at their occult sciences academies. So, you know, this stuff is not without precedent. They were also using those same dowsers to do sub-hunting in the Atlantic Ocean. And it wasn't until Gerald Gardner used his Wiccans to do Kona power rituals to protect their submarines that the dowsers stopped being effective. So when people talk about magic and war and all the rest of this stuff, and they put it over in the corner, it's like these things affect your thoughts. Thoughts affect your patterns and your behavior. So why wouldn't it have a huge effect? You know?
Yeah. And it would be instant. If we don't know what consciousness is, but we do know that it's instant. With it doesn't give a fuck about time or barriers or matter.
If you're using those pendulums in the sense of the activation between the body and, like you were saying, it's the whole. I don't even know where I was going with that, but I had a whole concept in mind, but I lost it.
It's a two-way street.
Pulled one of my moves.
Yeah. It'll come back to me.
Happens at best of us, probably.
Yeah.
Well, there's so many different resistance tests and a lot of muscle memory sort of activation stuff. It's like your entire body is an antenna.
Yeah.
And if we think of our bodies like antennas, we could start to understand all the different feelings that enter in that we ignore most of the time might be just different signals coming from the brain telling that part of your body, which are all significant, are all mapped out using occult sciences and using these symbols. If you could start to equate these different signals and the stuff, you become the object that's doing the dowsing.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say is, you know, if we're living in a hologram, every part is within every part. So, you know, when you get into those energies and the fact that we're co-creating reality together as a whole, you know, one person's dowsing and another person's shutting them down, you know, so there's this equation within the fractaline aspect of the hologram, you know?
Right. Well, just like we were saying about what these stones at Coral Castle are made out of, it's all piezoelectric. Well,
yeah, exactly.
What are they made out of? They're made out of bones.
Bones and crystals.
We're all piezoelectric, and not just our bones, but our hair and our fascia. The fascia that connects all of the different organs and muscles together is also piezoelectric. So from your hair all the way through your fascia into your bones, it's a massive conductor. And if we start to meditate along those terms and understand that experiencing those certain frequencies really does get us in tune physically with the natural world, it changes the game.
And the fact that we can increase and decrease the size of our auric field, you know, it's I mean, there's a lot of science here that is ancient that seems to be becoming more modern in the sense of, you know, I don't know. You'd like to think that there'd be more discovery in these fields.
It's like we don't have a choice at this point but to acknowledge the ancient technology. When we find out that the universe is holographic in nature, it started that we thought the brain was holographic in nature. We hammered that one out. They're like, oh, it looks like everything else is too. So then the Buddhists were right when they say everything is clay. And it's just different forms of clay. You know, clay being a metaphor for whatever the one thing is. And in 1972, the CIA put out string theory to throw all physicists off the trail. And it still, to this day, does so. And the term quantum gravity was thrown into the mix as well. It doesn't mean anything. There's no such thing as quantum gravity. But you'll see a bunch of these research papers that were pumped out referring to quantum gravity, one of which was Stephen Hawking, dude. And so he put out this, and so it doesn't mean anything, but they were like, put this in your paper. And to this day, Weinstein, Eric Weinstein just gave this big talk on it. He was ranting, red in the face about how, because he's a physicist, a theoretical physicist, and he was like, we have been so cast out from truth based just on these things that because they knew that subatomic realms is where we're going to find this magic, this esoteric power. Even this, once we understand that, it unlocks everything. So right around the time, I guess, after the Gateway process and Project Stargate and MK Ultra, besides bombarding us with the media and advertising that they did, they also decided to throw off the core of everybody by throwing a wrench into quantum physics. And I can't think of a worse crime against humanity.
You know what's really
on that?
Yeah, let me just put this out there real quick before I get too stoned to forget. Real interesting thing with what you were saying with Stephen Hawking and I guess pumping out bullshit. There's been pictures, and I saw it, of him on Ghislaine Maxwell's submarine. Now there's a good chance that Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Jordan Maxwell's companies, were probably the ones that actually published his works.
Bingo.
Dude,
because he was huge in publishing work. Say that again,
Joe?
Joe?
He's a rock star now,
Yeah.
and he's immortalized because he is passed away. But it's weird when you see that Neil deGrasse Tyson and guys like that cannot be wrong. They will not lie, and they can't be wrong. It is absolutely absurd to even suggest that they might be off kilter.
Fauci's like, I am the science.
Yeah. Dude, it's dogma.
It is dogma, 100%. 100%.
Go ahead,
most of
Headless.
most of the theoretical people just espouse philosophy. They are not in the lab testing anything.
Right.
So I want to put that out there.
You know who else is not in a lab testing or doing anything science? Neil deGrasse Tyson. He holds no patents.
Bingo.
He has put forward no scientific research papers.
His only claim to fame is that he knew Carl Sagan. That was it.
And he spouts off. He talks, and he's impossible to argue with. That's his superpower. Literally, the people that he mocks are the people who are developing our technology, one of which is, I know it's an unpopular opinion right now because he kind of acts a fool here and there, but what's his name? Oh, my goodness, I do this to myself.
Elon Musk?
No. It was a black dude, light skin. He went on Rogan recently, but he's been around.
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about. I don't know his name though.
Iron Man, he's an actor.
Yeah, the actor.
Dude's got 19 patents, including the VR headset that allows you to look around. Like whenever the image moves, when you move your body, that's his patent. Neil deGrasse Tyson, amongst other things. Neil deGrasse Tyson has invented 0 things. Yet you get Neil deGrasse Tyson on his little rebuttal or whatever, and he does this little compliment sandwich that people respect, but I can't stand it. Like he goes, he's like, your diagrams here are beautiful, but they're nonsense. And you're like, it's the empty space between the platonic solids. You're not picking that up. I know you're picking that up.
It's neuro-linguistic programming too.
Yeah. So, and then he does that one thing. He goes, this is another compliment sandwich that he does, and it's a strategy, and it does work. He goes, what's the black guy's name? Terrence
Howard.
Terrence Howard.
Lisa put it in the chat.
Thank you. On his rebuttal, he goes, Terrence Howard his work is not a waste. It's valuable because it shows future generations what not to do. So what he's doing is he's embarrassing somebody enough that the future generations coming up will be afraid to do anything similar to that. Now, Terrence Howard might be a little wacky with his whole 1 × 1 = 2 thing. I don't know. I think that's a metaphor, but whatever. The fact that he realized that we that we're ignoring the absent space between the platonic solids is viable, because now we know that there's no such thing as vacuum. There's no such thing as empty space. So if that's the case, Terrence is onto something about harnessing energy from void using the absent spaces between the platonic solids that Neil deGrasse Tyson vehemently is like, they're beautiful, but they're nonsense.
Right. I think Terrence Howard has always gone into things with a chip on his shoulder. And what he wanted to do is to show people how wrong they were in a lot of different ways. And I think in some ways he's right. And the model he's using for the elemental table, right?
Yeah.
Using that model gets people into the idea that all of these things can be broken down by frequency. That's not something you see in the everyday model. And, you know, it's a correct model. And the way it was constructed is perfect. All matches up. Well, you know, I think that's really what they wanted to get rid of, is because the idea of being able to manipulate things with frequency is not a very popular topic among any of these people. They never talk about how we could be damaged by cell phone towers. They never talk about any of that stuff, because it's basically, that's what we're going to be inundated with the rest of our lives, is this frequency damage.
Right.
And at the same time, they make these sound weapons to disperse crowds so we can't talk. You know, you just, yeah. It's a bit of a misuse of science.
Great.
Oh yeah.
So a lot of what Terrence is referring to. So I got a Walter Russell, the Universal
Nice.
One,
Yep.
and it's full of stuff like this, which if I am not advanced enough to understand what's going on here, but I find it to be just absolutely gorgeous. But one of the things in here is what you just mentioned, is the periodic table. Instead of having each element isolated into a square, it's on a spiral that's based in Fibonacci sequence that shows definitively by illustration that these particles are not particles, but instead pockets of energy that take on a form that interacts with our consciousness. There's so many diagrams in here that it's almost impossible to find the exact one. But,
I find that fascinating, how the periodic table of elements that he has, how they basically nest into one another on the spiral, depending upon the nuclear valence of each, as it ascends and descends in, you know, weight.
And that's how we change elements, is by their density too.
Right.
If anybody's interested in seeing just definitive evidence that Stephen Hawking is a fraud, all you got to do is look up Stephen Hawking translator. And before they had that little box that was speaking for him, they supposedly had a guy there that would translate what he was mouthing, which there's no way you could do that just if you watch the clip. The guy is clearly a fraud, right? The entire thing is just a sham. And just by looking at that video, it's like, that's the rest of the science that you guys have been ascribing to. That's Stephen Hawking. He's the forerunner of all of this garbage.
Right.
Yeah.
It's perfect. Yeah.
That's the periodic table right there. And that looks fresh to me. I mean, that's got some riz to it, dude. And I happen to be passing this page on the way over, but this was before Itzhak Bentov. So this pendulum here shows the difference between infinite energy and energy that's completely at rest being the same thing. And the way he describes it is with the pendulum. Now, Itzhak Bentov kind of translates this for us, because this jargon is a bit much for me. But whenever it's at this crescendo right here, where it has a moment of pause, the atomic structure of it ceases to exist for just a moment of time, which tipped him off way before his time that maybe it's not there in the first place. Maybe it's the motion of it and our observation of it, or a combination of the two, that makes it exist in the first place. And the way Itzhak Bentov describes it, and you know he's got something good going, because he died on that famous plane crash after he got done working for the CIA when they were done with him. No indication there, but whatever. If you want bullshit literature, read the work of men who died early. It's invaluable. But he described it. He was like, if you have an item that's completely at rest, or versus an item that is moving at infinite speed. theoretically, if that same item was moving at infinite speed, it would be there all of the time, always. Therefore, at rest. So that's why he mentioned, he was like, when you are completely in a meditative state and you shut down the thoughts, you become a microcosmic form of omniscience. Sorry.
Well, I was going to throw in there that what you're saying about the pendulum force, it actually sounds pretty similar to the gravity dead zones that are around the planet, right? Because if you're thinking about it, what you get at the very pinnacle of that swing is where there's no more forces acting on it within that moment of time. And so what you've got around the Earth is pockets of massive plasmatic energy that stick to these gravity dead zones in our upper atmosphere. And to me, if plasma is conscious and they're sticking in these gravity wells, you could actually form a lot of these, gods or whatever in terms of pure conscious energy that's not being acted upon.
And they've documented these plasma fields in a couple specific spots that have this potential.
Yeah.
And if that's where the gods are coming from, that's interesting. I mean, if this is where that kind of world and that hallucination is sort of manifesting as sort of infinite energy, that's
and
really...
also it kind of gets into ancient archonic forces as well, Right.
Well, the Greeks said that their gods lived in the third heaven.
Right.
And that's what it says in the Bible, too. So they're working off of the same cosmology. And if that cosmology was a working one, as in like shamanism and ritual experiences, you're talking about them connecting with these sort of zones of infinite consciousness.
Right.
Did you want to get into the red door?
I would love to.
Right.
So do you got like a picture of the red door?
Oh, yeah. Let me see. Why did I need to do that?
Dude, this thing is going to be a heyday to even try to like describe without the pictures of it. But this is to me the most fascinating and the scariest part of Coral Castle, especially considering it's really put to the side. It's not like a big deal that's put on display. And it's just stark red, like a warning. And it's almost not like he hid it, but at the same time was like, this is the part that no one should find until they are certain of my capabilities. And himself, like he wanted people to discover the secret of the red door after definitively trusting him by seeing his work. And nobody knew about the orbit of the Earth around the sun until it was years after the red door. And I don't think we even got our knowledge of the orbit of the Earth around the sun from his red door. It just so happened that years later, we found out that his model worked. And that begs the question, how many other of his theories and models actually worked? And that's what's fascinating right there is there's a bell. It says ring the bell. And so this is an emergency to him. This is something that is so important that it needs to be alarm. It has to have an alarm that sets off for anybody who realizes it. Because I don't even know if that bell works. It's probably symbolic. But yeah, so there it is right there. All right. So there's a sun in the middle, and the electromagnetic field around the sun is displayed here somewhat accurately, the best you could draw on a rusty old door. But the line that comes off of the sun is not from the center of the sun. They're both attached to a spot on the sun off to the side. That shows us that the center of gravity in the sun is not the center of the sun. We didn't know that until very recently. The lines that come off of the sun to each corresponding Earth are different lengths. and the length corresponds with the Fibonacci sequence of difference of the elliptical that the Earth takes around the sun. We used to think that orbits were perfect circles until we discovered these elliptical orbits. We didn't know that the Earth did that around the sun. It has nothing to do with the seasons. But the 21 there is where it gets really crazy, because the Earth goes around the sun in this weird elliptical shape that doesn't seem to have a pattern until you start to get around 18, 19, 20. And then as you approach 21, it forms this spirograph that you might have seen when you're a kid and you do the pencil and the gears and stuff, right? It forms this sacred geometry around it that causes the Earth every 21 years, or I shouldn't say years, but 21 cycles around the sun, because as Ed himself displayed also before we knew it, a year is not a year to us. According to sidereal year is quite different than our 365 days. But when it completes that 21 days, 21 cycles around the sun, is when it finally returns to its first original place around the sun, and then causes a magnetic shift to happen that makes the Earth flip over. And he demonstrated this with a model that no one's got footage of, but Praveen Mahen, he had the resources to do so, and he built this model and showed it to be not only mathematically correct, but absolutely effective. So basically, if we are to buy what Ed is telling us is true, moon's got water, that the sidereal year can be calculated by the seasons, that sundials that are concave can be accurate down to the second throughout the entire year unceasingly. All of these things that he was correct about decades before modern science was, we might not have so much hesitation to believe him with this claim, which is that every 21,000 years, the Earth flips over.
I buy it.
The question now is, how long ago was the last one?
Wasn't
left that part out.
Wasn't it kind of like possibly known that he had an idea, he just didn't say anything?
I think he did know. Well, the way he calculated the seasons, the day of the year, the time. We didn't talk about the sundial, but the megalithic sundial, for example, was the first one to use a concave bottom that actually made up for the analemma that the sun takes in the sky. If you do like a stop motion of the sun, it makes that, that figure 8 that the sun does in the sky until the 3 days where it rests and then starts over, right?
Looks sort of like infinity.
Yeah, it makes an infinity symbol, right? So because of that analemma, a sundial cannot be correct all year. If you have a stick that casts a shadow, it's going to be off by a couple minutes at this time of the year, opposite off for this time of the year, and it only matches directly. There it is right there. So because of that concave, that's I think a Fibonacci ratio, which is what the universe is based off of, which it kind of opens the doors to all of these mathematics that he impossibly knew so long before us. This concave structure allows that little nub right there, that little shadow boner, to exactly line up on this little sundial throughout the year without having to be adjusted or moved, and you couldn't move it. The thing weighed 7 tons. So he utilized this sundial, the Polaris Telescope, the Gemini stone, and pretty much everything else in Coral Castle that wasn't necessarily decorative or meant to produce power to make these calculations. And all of those calculations accumulate into the symbology of what the red door represents. So we can't argue with him on any of these things because they work. Meanwhile, scientists will not hesitate to say, okay, he was right about that, but he must be wrong about the pole shift. So that we have a pickle. We have a pickle there. Some say that the last pole shift was the Younger Dryas Some say that was a comet, though. Some say it was a solar flare. Robert Schoch says it was solar. I tend to go with Robert Schoch on the solar flare thing because of the petrified stone and petrified forts that ancient people used to build. They have glass on top of them, and to make those petrified forts be petrified, the lightning would have had to been astronomical. I mean, absolutely unimaginable power. And ancient people were hiding in these petrified forts while this lightning, this plasmatic discharge between planets, maybe Mars might be what we're looking at, because the Grand Canyon and the gouges in Mars are very similar. So the Headless mentioned the electric universe, and that ties us right back into that puppy right there. If that is so, and you tie that into what Ed is saying, it seems that it's not static electricity, but that's a good way to look at it in this microcosm, right? It causes because magneticity, well, Ed said magneticity, it's a combination of magnetism and electricity, right? They work hand in hand. So if you have a plasmatic discharge of electricity between planets, whether it's because of this cycle it takes around the sun, or maybe it gets too close to an adjacent planet like Mars, especially long ago when everything was so much closer together, it would cause the planet to flip. Go ahead.
Just to hop in there, Joey, it's not uncommon to have planets that have discharge of electricity between each other's surfaces. So Jupiter has Europa, and you can hear it on Earth, on radios on Earth, the plasmatic discharges from Europa to the planet Jupiter.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of energy, but it happens.
That's how powerful it is, that we can hear it all the way here on Earth, you know?
Joey, wasn't also the magnetic poles on the sun, they flip every 11 to 22 years?
Yeah, so Ed...
2012.
That's another thing that Ed pointed out, was that the sun has 4 magnetic quadrants as opposed to 2, which, again, at his time was absolutely psycho talk, right? But he depicted that in the Sun Couch, that the sun has 4 magnetic centers, and the Earth is attached to one of them. And when you're attached to one of them, like such, it causes an instability every time it completes that 21 cycles around it, you know? So that 21,000 years might coincide with some of the great extinctions that we have seen over and over again. And if you trace that out in a pattern, it creates a pattern. It's repeatable. It's not random. It's not like, oh, the Anthropocene extinction was here, the Cretaceous extinction was static or whatever. It happens. They're evenly spaced.
Correct.
That raises a lot of alarm. And I think that's why he put a bell up there, you know? So whether he or not he knew when the last pole shift was, I am assuming he did because he calculated everything else. But
doesn't it coincide with the shifting of our pole stars as well?
I'm not sure if he indicated that or not. Like at this point, I think it's hypothesis. It's like he handed it over to us to take over.
Joey, is there any record of him expressing any kind of synesthesia himself?
Oh, Ed?
Yeah.
Not that I know of, but then again, he didn't talk. He spoke, and if you read his book, it's practically incoherent.
Right, because with the synesthesia, he's seeing numbers and colors as being synonymous, and if there is this sort of harmony to the universe, he'd be able to see it, basically. Right. In the form of mathematics, as well as, you know, in his mind's eye, how that, number interacts with him and how he views the world. So
it might have been a different form of synesthesia, because synesthesia occurs with hearing and then seeing color. So you hear vibration, you hear music, and then you see the color. But it might have been something in terms of looking at magnetism and then seeing something else. Like it's a different neuronal pathway that are attached together. That's why you have synesthesia, because when you hear, the actual receptors that are programmed for hearing actually overlap the retinal processing unit area of the brain. That's why you get that overlap. So it might have been something reversed of what you're saying, and that's where you're getting the combination of the two.
if we're to assume that he has a form of savantism, that all of a sudden becomes not weird, and then all of a sudden it might help us understand how he was able to find underground aquifers so easily.
Right. So I read somewhere that Pythagoras had a brother that was sort of a savant and didn't like speak, but he would just stare at the heavens and basically convey the ideas. And that's where Pythagoras was said to have gotten the ideas of the singing of the spheres.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge. I would love to hear more on that.
Yeah. I read that in some book a number of years ago, you know.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised because that's what it takes. It seems as if the savantism is what causes the person to pick up the information, but they can't convey it. So you need somebody close to them.
Yeah. Like
to be able to
speak or
translate
something.
it.
Yeah.
Which leads us right back to the telepathy tapes because guess who told us about the hill? It wasn't the savant kids. It was the mothers who were close to them translating exactly what they were trying to say.
You need an interpreter, kind of like what Headless is saying about the Sensentia, that you have these phenomenons, but the only way that you can express them is through a different medium versus speech. The speech is, but the medium itself has to be different and has to be the overlay to which you interpret. Yeah,
it's like one sensation to a savant person, one single moment of perception for them is going to take up 1,000 words and pictures that have to be brutally drawn out and explained in mathematical terms that they frankly just don't have, and probably in a way don't have time to as one person, you know. So what better way to express those things than with gigantic megalithic structures that bear the mathematics of those very units of information.
You know, one thing I did want to bring up earlier, and I'll bring it up now since we're kind of back on it a little bit. I think you did mention something about him seeing like what flesh and colors of blue. Something earlier.
Oh, Nikola Tesla. But
all right. Well, Crowley, when he supposedly did the Book of the Law, the room that he was in supposedly lit up as blue too, according to him.
I see. Alexander the Great stayed the night in the Great Pyramid in the King's Chamber, and he was saying he saw full-blown visions of what he had. So I mean, that begs the question: can we induce this kind of savantism?
And the pyramid itself, you know, blocking out all those rays, specifically with the tunnels coming from Orion and Sirius, you know, so they're directing certain energies into that King's Chamber. It's very, and then the fact that it's also on top of a spring and you have the aquifer there, so you have all of these elements combined, you know, to
And then if you read the coffer texts about what the purpose of the pyramids were, we dismiss it as superstition. But the pharaohs say that they blasted their consciousness out into the stars to join the netter, and that they rendered their consciousness into a viral format that we might consider plasma, and were able to go into the heavens. And the reason that they were mummified, the bodies were mummified, was to create an anchor in the case that they would have to come back.
So I had something on the Netcher, right?
Yeah.
So that's the hieroglyph for the Netcher, and it's a flag. Isn't that interesting? The Egyptian word for God is communicated as a flag. And so now we have all these flags that are ruling over us. And you think about the UN, and you think about all this stuff today, and what are we giving? We're given the Netcher. Again, and Netcher is one of the ways that I believe the etymology of the word nature came about. And what if we're talking about human nature? Human nature to worship the flag.
Dude,
let your freak flag fly.
So like, Washington is all Egyptian symbology. The dollar bill.
Yeah.
It's not even hidden, really.
Greek and Egyptian,
They're still with us. That freaks me out.
Say they come from the Egyptians. All the rest of these groups that really have a control over the religious sentiments of our society and of people all come from this Egyptian root, you know?
Right. Christianity has a lot of traits.
Well, And these Coral Castle itself, these ancient builders, rising up, coming from those original 2 pillars that had the 7 sacred arts that basically gave the craft to the builders, the temple builders, and them transitioning and moving, building all these temples based around sacred numbers, sacred proportions, back to the temple of the body of the whole. It's yeah.
What if all these things are hieroglyphic? What you're seeing there in Coral Castle, each one of those things are words that build up a sentence.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real key to all of this is thinking in those terms, because this is like a cosmic language.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, he kind of goes from seconds to hours to months to years to the red door, showing the whole of the cycle and where the cycle begins and ends.
Yeah.
The serpent eats its tail.
To your
Yeah.
point, Robby, and Headless's on the 7 is that we all switch, or the Earth or the planetary system switches between 7 pole stars constantly
Right.
throughout the
Depending
history.
on the movement of the shift and where, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're just starting to really understand the depth of energy that we're dealing with, because this is like the thought processes of all of our greatest ancestors
Right.
coalescing. And I think that's something important to keep in mind with times like this, where we are seeing kind of a shift, is that you can tap into that mindset if you're willing to, actually take a look at these concepts we're talking about. And that's the first step into greatness,
Yeah. And if we are receiving like an antenna this information via the pineal gland once it's kind of lit up, that begs the question of why so many people see hieroglyphics, living hieroglyphics, when they're on DMT,
Right.
which Strassman displayed is produced because the pineal gland produces, if I'm not mistaken, serotonin, melatonin, dimethyltryptamine.
Yep.
The third of which we don't bother to study. It's the most interesting one.
Right.
And whenever that's kicked into high gear, people see hieroglyphics that are not being it's not like the hieroglyphics are being shown to them by the beings. The beings are hieroglyphic.
Well, almost like the universe itself is made up of these, pulsing and generating hieroglyphic mechanisms that kind of seem to have some relation to holding matter together.
Yeah. You ever?
That's why we have symbols that repeat over and over again, is because the symbols are the God. They're the same.
Right.
Yeah. You ever do the thing with you put the laser, you get a vertical laser on the wall?
I've heard about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. And you don't even have to be okay, to see the talking hieroglyphics, obviously you need the 3 lungfuls of DMT to get the Terrence McKenna experience, dude. But dude, half a puff of DMT and you put that laser on the wall, you're looking straight through the wall and into what looks like the Matrix, but instead of ones and zeros, it's hieroglyphs.
Yeah.
Not necessarily specific ones from Egypt, but that's the mood, and so maybe there's a common root to runes, hieroglyphics.
Yeah.
The Easter Island has the Ruga or something like that. It's a code. No one's deciphered it yet. Rangu, I think, is what they're called. I don't know. Yeah, but those look like hieroglyphics, and Hindu writing, and oh my goodness, Hebrew mathematical language.
I was gonna say Hebrew. When you get into Moses essentially being in that region, and you get into the burning bush, and that burning bush has the highest rate of endogenous DMT in the region.
The acacia.
Yeah, and then going up to the mountain, and basically, they said he came back and his face was glowing. But there's Ralph, I forgot the guy's name, but he postulates that the carbon molecule, that as the molecule turns, that if you shine a light through it, at every point of the rotation, basically creates the Hebrew alphabet.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like that's where it came from in the first place. So we've been making imitations of it ever since.
Of the natural function of the way that the molecules of the universe work. And that's why the letters are written in all time and predict and like give and are part of everything.
Yeah. No one ever seems to like question where we get the letter A. Like we always were like, yeah, that's the way we got it. Moving on. Yeah. And it's like the same.
The letter A is an interesting one. So, all of our letters come from the Phoenician. And so the Phoenician letter A was an upside down letter A, and it looked like the Taurus symbol, right? So that was the symbol for the bull. And for some reason, once it got over to the Greek, they decided to flip it upside down. And so the A then became sort of like the capital A that we see in Latin.
Alpha.
Yeah.
It goes back to the idea of the stars. All of the Phoenician alphabet was equated to the stars, and all the rest of these other just magnificent works of art were related to how the stars interacted with us. If you look at the Greeks, their language for the gods was the language for the thing itself.
Right.
So all of these things were not disconnected in the minds of the people observing them, and they had a lot greater connection to those things, thinking about them as personalities, We don't necessarily understand that we do that naturally, but it's not like front of mind. So it's all subconscious, how we interact with these symbols. And we think of them as more ideograms. An ideogram is just like a walk sign. It's just a guy on the side. It doesn't really have any deeper meaning than that. But really, all of these symbols are much deeper than ideograms. And as we interact with them, we don't really have that context.
Sir Hammer Purgstall, he wrote an essay on hieroglyphs, and he talks about that every single glyph is fundamentally telling a story of the cosmic foundation of what reality is and how it was created.
Shit.
Yeah.
Itzhak Benthoff, whenever he was, the CIA was pulling him out of his body, and he was talking about the Aleph. He's like everything, he's like a cluster of universes. They're all birthed out from this big Aleph. And he's like, this Aleph doesn't actually exist. You're not going to measure it. You're not going to weigh it. You're not going to see it. But he's like, but you can see it. And it gives birth to universes. And he's like, in the book himself, Stalking the Wild Pendulum, he's like, it's an Aleph. That's what it is. And that's bizarre.
And the A itself is at the beginning of the alphabet, which essentially is the force creator that begins to use all of those letters to name the things and bring forth all of creation.
Yeah.
It's like there's a cosmic force that makes languages survive, and it has to be traveling along that course for it to continue. Right?
I wanted to say something almost exactly like that. I wonder if everyone on Earth got amnesia at the same time or died, and then there was just a baby that came up, like hypothetically, completely. Would we keep this going, or would it just be, I think so.
Well, I know that the really promising sign is these rat reincarnation studies, where they're taking a rat, a parent rat, right, and they put it in these tests where it'll have a stimulus response to whatever the test is. So whether they're giving it food or giving it electric shocks, they give it a stimulus like a sound, right, and then they'll do the shock or do the feeding. Well, they become sperm donors, and their children then have the stimulus response without having that stimulus response. That's just like us and all of our ancestors. I mean, all of these memories we keep cycling through, even though we're not really conscious of the whole process.
Well,
Dude, I knew there was a reason I was an alcoholic. That fucking explains everything.
so I have chickens, right? And chickens, when a hawk flies over and they've never even seen a predator before, they'll instantly duck down.
Yeah.
The chickens, I got them at a year old. They'd never had corn, but as soon as I threw the corn out, they knew exactly what it was and went crazy for it. So you're getting into this genetic memory, kind of like the monarch butterflies, and getting into, some of the paperclip stuff as far as the idea that we hold these things inherent within our genome. These inherent
Junk DNA.
Right. Junk DNA.
That's what they want to eliminate. They want to eliminate those ancestral memories. I mean, think about how you could brainwash entire peoples if they don't have that sort of still small voice in the back of their head telling them how to do things they don't know how to do.
Right.
And look how DNA was discovered, right? Crick, he was on acid.
And he was on acid. That's right.
And so that ties back to everything. It seems like when we get all this material out of the way, we see clearly.
They imagined what it was going to be before they found it, and then they found what they imagined.
Right. Oh my God, dude. And so with chickens, can you confirm this? A baby chickens will hatch. Mm-hmm. They're typically in a box, right? Mm-hmm. And they'll start pecking at the cardboard bottom of the box. It's not the ground. They're not here. They could be in your house. They're not hearing.
They inherently know to scratch and dig to look for their sustenance.
Right.
It's just part of the nature.
We would keep putting up Christmas trees without having any idea why we're doing it, right? As a species.
Yeah. Going back to Addis and the tall standing, pine tree. And it's, it is interesting.
Man. So it's like Manly P. Hall talked about, if you understand the language of symbolism, then you understand all things through your own human body. And and in his book, Initiate of the Flame, every chapter he's like, this is the cube. The sword of Excalibur was in the stone cube. He's like, the stone cube represents your body. And then he goes, okay, this is the pyramid. The pyramid of Egypt, blah, blah, yada, yada. It represents you, your body, right? And then he goes on, and at the end of the book, he's like, okay, so far you've noticed everything represents the body. He's like, it's different forms of the body, but when you tie it all together, you yourself are an encyclopedia of all of the great mysteries. There's nothing lacking.
And you get into all the native cultures, and they talk about they have the force of all the ancestors standing behind them, giving them information, providing, showing the way. It's
The Cosmic Serpent by Jeremy Narby, he talks about, he's like, what's up with all the serpents and all this stuff? And he does the ayahuasca, and he as an anthropologist saw something different than cosmic serpents. He saw the workings of the universe, the mathematics and sacred geometry of the universe. He's like, easily, if I didn't have my education, I would have called that cosmic serpents, because that's what it looks like. The colors, the scales,
vibrating,
the vibrations,
the sine wave. Yeah.
So it's different languages for the same thing.
Along those same lines, I don't know if you guys have heard of Ken Wheeler before, but he came out with a paper about the plane of inertia. And the plane of inertia, I think, perfectly explains sort of all of the repeatability of symbolism, all of this stuff. It says, all attraction and repulsion is governed by dielectricity. Magnetism is the dielectric field. The discharging dielectric is the radiation modality we call magnetism. Magnetism is reaching out in space, not in question. However, radiation only displaces things in the case of magnetism, causes an inductive reaction in the interatomic magnetoelectric ferrous objects, thereby causing dielectric coherency. So this dielectric coherency produces a plane of inertia in the middle of it. This is why you see, if you hold a magnet up to a spirograph or whatever with the little iron, or you'll see it all around the outside and not through the middle. That middle is that plane of inertia. So where we exist between the poles has that sort of plane of inertia idea, and all of the forces of electricity can be condensed onto that model of the plane of inertia, causing this repeating effect, right? It's sort of like we become sort of the I guess you could say the coils that now this same force is playing over and over again.
Well,
this is where you get the forms. This is where all of this geometric stuff is being brought into form.
right. And when you look at the body itself, as far as any living body, creates that torsion field, and the essential part of the function is that plane of inertia that is the force manifester that can be used and manipulated through the chakra system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Well, playing off that same concept over and over again.
Yeah. And that mouthful of scientific of everything you just
It reminds me too of the
No, go ahead.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I'm lagging as I'm interrupting to the computer. It reminds me, of course, of the idea of the akashic field,
Yeah.
right? Which is where if we can get to in a consciousness manner, then which harkens exactly to what these women said in the telepathy tapes of the hill, that it was as if there was a plane or a field, and the hill of these thoughts is where everyone went because it stuck out amongst the field. It was like they were talking about if it was hard to find each other, but it was like, no, we all go to the one element that is protruding from the hill.
So
excuse me, the plane.
If you didn't have that scientific terminology, you would call it the hill, or maybe like the Ogdode, or the cosmic egg, or the tree of life,
the mound in the waters of chaos.
Yeah, all of the above. There's ancient ways to depict what we are describing with science today under different languages,
right?
And we call it superstition today. Wild.
And it repeats over and over and over again. And unless you're looking at it from a different perspective, you're never going to know what you're seeing.
Right.
Yeah. All these guys, it seems like they not only predicted the future, but this gap of amnesia between it. I mean, it's this guy behind me right here with the little dot on his forehead. You know, that's obviously going to depict the pineal gland. But further than that, look at his ears. He did that, I'm pretty sure, way before some of these guys in the hardcore bands did the same thing. You know, like it's the site. Like, so right now you could go outside and you're going to see a guy, probably a young man, with a very large thing in his ear.
Disc.
Right. And they were doing that. Now, I guarantee you that there's some, in Africa, they did it in the lip and stuff. But yeah, that's if we are wiped out by, say, a younger Dryas catalysm. Oh my God. Anyway, cataclysm. My apologies. We will still cycle and do the same things that these guys once did. It's just buried in us.
Right. They actually went and studied different types of dances all around the world, and they determined that there's these basic 22, 23 different movements that the body's capable of, and consistently you see that just as the natural function of the way that the fractal expresses itself.
Yeah. It's almost like an alphabet. There's only so many different conjunctions. Right. And bees dance language. They dance maps, if I'm not mistaken. Right. Yeah.
There are so many different holy people throughout all of history that point back to all religion coming from a secret college of holy men that study and worship bees.
Oh, is that so?
Yeah, which you get into that topic, and it's like all the bee symbolism and all the different, cults and all the different formation groups that started all these different religions. It's pretty obvious.
The ambrosia, the nectar of the gods. You get into all these, the land of milk and honey.
Yeah.
Mormons and Masons are huge with the beehive.
Oh, yeah.
Mormons, Masons, all the big cult groups are all about the bees.
there's that my favorite hieroglyph. It's not a hieroglyph, is it? It's a stone. It's a petroglyph. Is a man anthropomorphized bee with a bee face and everything, but he's got mushrooms sprouting out from him everywhere, and that's about as old as it gets right there.
The blue honey.
Right. I think that. There's
I
there's something
believe
to that. Like the vibration.
I believe in ancient Egypt, the bee was associated with royalty. If they displayed a cartouche or cartridge of the identity of the person, the bee denoted that this person was royalty. I believe.
Think about all the gold and black striping on everything.
Oh yeah, yeah.
All bee.
It was Isis that was said to actually was the one who brought, and they called them the flies that made nectar.
Bees go silent during the eclipse. I did not know that, Lisa. Wild. And also, and this is also secondhand. I don't have it in front of me, but beekeepers live longer per capita than average people. Something about their vibe, and also, it's impossible for them to fly.
Yeah.
But they fly anyway because
they levitate based on the frequency.
Yeah. Yes, the wings are just kind of aiming them.
Right. Well, and generating that frequency that allows them to create that bubble to be able to levitate and manipulate.
See, maybe Da Vinci was onto something. His flying machine involved like dragonfly wings. And we saw that. We're like, get out of here. That's not feasible. But maybe he didn't mean it to actually indicate liftoff.
Right.
But instead to induce a vibration. And I mean, how a lot of his work was kind of in code to avoid getting burned at the stake or whatever, they did back then.
All right, I think if you guys don't mind, I think maybe we'll just wrap it up here. It's been over 2 hours.
Real quick, Headless, can you send me anything on that rat study that you mentioned earlier?
Okay, if you just look up ancestral rat study, you'll find it. It's one of the first ones lifted. They keep repeating it. They keep getting the same result, but nobody wants to use it.
Yeah, that's worth looking into. I can't wait to check that out.
I had one more thing, if you don't mind me jumping into the bee rabbit hole. So there was a Russian bee scientist named Viktor Grabinikov. He was an entomologist who claimed to have discovered some insects could levitate rather than fly. He proposed that a dead insect body parts attached to the underside of a platform could create a levitation effect. Grabinikov wrote about his experiments as flying over the Russian countryside using his levitation device in his self-published book, My World.
It's self-published too.
Yeah. So Grabinikov is doing these experiments with these bee wings, and he's getting some sort of repulsion effect. And you can actually find the videos of him doing it. So there's something deep down this bee rabbit hole, and it ties into all the rest of the topics we've been covering.
Every time you say bee rabbit hole, I know you're avoiding saying bee hole. I feel like that close to it.
Then we'd have to go into Crowley, and we don't want to talk about that.
That's hilarious.
You know what? You know how I can wrap it up this way too. This is a fun fact, and I bring this up a lot. The same muscle that's in your pupil that makes your eye dilate is the same one that's in your asshole. There you go. Yep. Yeah, it's fun fact for you. Sphinx the muscle.
The sphincter, yeah.
So, thank you very much, Joey, for coming on. That was amazing. Again, it was better than I expected. I thank you so much for staying on so long with us. That was awesome. We talked about a lot of things. We did a lot of talking about Coral Castle. That's what's up. Thank you. The chat was off the hook. Thank you very much, everybody who jumped in. I really appreciate it. Joey, real quick, let everybody know where they can find your stuff again, please.
I got Library of the Untold is my main milk and honey, so to speak. But if anybody wants to dig a little bit deeper, also on YouTube is Void Stares Back, which is all of the music that I do for the channel. Some people like them in song format, and that's kind of my original passion before having the channel was songwriting and stuff. So there's Library of the Untold and Void Stares Back. Oh, I always forget this. I wrote a book called Book of Wonderful Suffering, and I'm not very good with angling this thing. Everything's backwards. But the link to that is on the YouTube channel too. So it's all kind of right there.
Awesome. All right. Yeah. And if you want, give me any of the links that you want. I'll definitely throw it in the show notes. Thank you, everybody else, for joining us. Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate it. Ethan Indigo again. Thank you. Robby Marx. We got Headless Giant.
Always.
And we got Mike. I'll put all of their links in the bottom as well. It'll just take too long for everybody to plug themselves. But I'm sure by now you already know who they all are. Again, thank you all. And until the next one, that's the end of another Occult Rejects. Later.
Thanks, guys.